Peeping Ken. When I was in my second year of university, I lived alone. It was a downstairs flat with my bedroom facing towards the street. I had some heavy green curtains, so didn't mind too much. My friends lived about a 15-minute walk away, and I would go over every day till sometimes around 3 or 4 a.m. or even sleep over. I had a long-distance boyfriend at the time and would sometimes be up late Skype sexting. Halloween rolls around and I'm out with my friends. I decide to go back to mine and be a sexy Skype supergirl for my boyfriend. We get into it and have a great time. Curtains closed, lights off, just to be safe. I'd had a drunk man try to get in one time. I fell asleep early and I left the curtains open. It had been super creepy. I woke up to the sounds of someone trying to push open the front door. When I looked up there was a man staring, stood so close his nose almost touched the window. I freaked out and spent the night in the living room. So, the lights were off, curtains shut. I noticed a kind of flickering in my peripheral and looked around. While meeting at the bottom, the curtains parted very slightly near the top. Through the gap, there seems to be a trail of steam rising. I cover myself and get up to investigate. I have to get up and stand on my tiptoes and see through. I'm a short ass. The source of the steam was a man's mouth, hunched over and panting, exposed to the waist, violently stroking his member. I tried to rearrange the curtains quickly, grabbing my laptop and hiding in the living room. A few days later, there's a pink envelope waiting for me when I walk through the door. As I pick it up, various small change falls out, written on the lip of the envelope in a jagged capital letters. I mean you no harm, my name. A horrible cold feeling spread throughout my body. Dread overlapped by shock. I've never felt anything like it. I turn the card over and read the address side. There is the same handwriting. To the girl in the front room. Opening it, I see it's a quite traditional sort of card. Cream with a delicate watercolor of bouquet on the front, thinking of you, and golden curvature next to it. The inside was completely covered by a message, completely in capitals, some letters backwards and some words misspelled. I gave the card to the police, so can't recite the whole passage verbatim, but the essence was, I'm an old man who has lived on the street for a long time. You may be the happiest I've ever been in my life on Halloween. I am sorry I scared you. You are very beautiful. I love to watch you whether you are working on your computer or touching yourself. Please leave your curtains open just a little bit for me. And each time you do this, I will post a couple pounds through the letterbox. Signed, Ken. I called my friends, then got the police to come round, because they couldn't really do anything about it. They took the card as evidence, I guess, gave me a case number and said they would get the patrol car to drive past my house for the near future. I stayed at my friend's for a week and had one of them stay over at mine after that. That wasn't quite the last of Ken. Sometimes there'd be a knocking at my windows, but kept my curtains 100% closed 3 or 4 months of no incidences later, we got snow. I was leaving my house, now in the habit of checking my curtains every single time I left or got back to the house. I see a set of footprints tracing the entire front window back and forth like someone had been pacing. After I moved, my friend had a job where she could check the local electoral register. We did find that a Ken Mordew lived on my previous street. We did no further investigations because it was a student area. I would walk past that house on my way from home for the next 2 years. Well, after I'd moved, I saw that the windows had been completely covered in newspapers, stuck from the inside. Seems like someone was having trouble with Ken still coming around. So, let's not meet again, Ken. Okay. Near miss at a bar. When I was about 24 years old, I was always busy with work and I lived in a small historic town. So needless to say, I didn't get out much. Which is why I was so excited when my 30-something cousin came up from Fresno to visit. I was also excited when she wanted to go check out the scene on the first night that she stayed with me. As it turns out, she was a drinker, so we headed out to the few small bars in my town. We only ended up finding one bar that was kind of happening. It had a pool table, plus it allowed smoking inside, so we were sold. I decided to sit at the bar, and my cousin headed off to play pool with some other guys. As I'm sitting at the bar sipping my drink and checking my phone, I get a tap on my shoulder. I turn to see an older gentleman whom I didn't recognize right away. Seeing my puzzled look, he exclaims, "It's me, Cody's dad." I then instantly realized that he is the father of a boy I dated like in 8th grade when I was about 14 years old. His dad seemed nice enough, but I did remember that he was pretty stern character back then. Sometimes as a punishment for his son, he would have him dig trenches even in the summertime, in the hard-pan rocky ground. I could even remember hanging out at his house back in the day and just getting a bad feeling about his dad, though I never experienced anything around his dad that would justify that feeling. So, of course, I was surprised he even recognized me at all after all those years later. He brought me a drink and we sort of started catching up a little bit. As we're talking, my cousin comes over to check in on me. Upon seeing a much older man at the bar speaking with me eventually, he suggested that we go outside to smoke since the bar was getting pretty smoky. Once we were outside though, I realized we were pretty much alone. This was fine, I figured, since he was one of my distant neighbors I'd known on and off over the years, but I figured wrong. I began to understand when he started to ask me more personal questions. He started asking me whether I had a boyfriend or not, or if I'd ever considered dating an older guy. So I suggested that we go back inside where it'd be a bit warmer, but again, after a few minutes, he wanted to go back outside. At that point, though, I was ready to blow him off politely. My cousin, seeing all of this since she was walking over to check in on me again, she gave me sort of a warning look before turning and walking back to her game of pool. As the night progressed, he continued to try to get me to go outside with him, and this time, though, he wanted to go to his truck. Finally, he grabbed my arm and just tried to pull me outside with him. Thank God for my cousin. She seemed to materialize out of nowhere and she grabbed my other arm yelling, "Fuck off!" to him. He immediately backed off and disappeared into the small crowd toward the back exit. For the rest of the night, we enjoyed ourselves and had much needed fun. It wasn't until about 6 months later that I heard a horrifying story about him from another neighbor. I was told he was in prison, probably for life. Apparently, he had been stalking and watching his soon-to-be ex-wife at their former house for months. Eventually, he had decided to straight up kidnap her, tying her up, gagging her. He then put her in his truck or backseat and drove her down towards Mexico. In Los Angeles, California, he decided they should stop for the night, as it was about an 8-hour drive from our hometown. All night on that stay, he repeatedly raped, beat, tortured her. He had apparently told her that he was taking her to Mexico to kill her. He had been treating her that way for years. I knew upon hearing that my bad feeling as a kid was justified. I'm now getting chills just writing this part. Somehow, though, she managed to escape his brutal attack that night. He was arrested pretty quickly after that. So Ken, who had tried to get me alone outside the bar that night to do God knows what to me, let's not ever, ever meet again. Stalking Ken. Right, some context for my story. I live in a tiny hamlet where everybody knows everybody, especially the people who live on your lane. Our lane is no exception to this rule. There are only two families who don't really communicate in the way the rest of our lane does. The first family, Rona and Alan. They're really lovely people, just very introverted, I guess. But they'd always start a conversation when I get home from school and search for my key to get inside. I digress. The other family I know nothing about, and I've been living there for 9 years. My ex-girlfriends, I'll refer to her name by Hannah in the future, grandparents had lived down this lane for a good 30 years and knew dilly squat. The only thing we all knew back then was that Ken, I'm pretty sure that was his name, was quite pedantic. But he was passive-aggressive and never verbally raised his grievances. Now that the context has been set to, I'll start with the first eyebrow raiser about his personality. Hannah and I used to spend our time rollerblading back and forth up our lane back when we were just best friends. Our lane is a dead end, and as I said, we live in the middle of nowhere, so cars were infrequent, which is why we chose to skate here. Neighbors would come and go, but most of them would wave, say hello, but not Ken. He just raced down the lane. One time he almost hit me. I had to throw myself backwards just to avoid it, scraping my elbows and wrists, which, let's face it, is never a nice experience for a 12-year-old girl. He didn't apologize, just glared at us, muttering to himself before going back inside and slamming his door. For a few years, small incidences like that would happen every so often. I'd run back from Hannah's, about a 30-second sprint, and hear his window slam or something like that, always assuming it was due to the fact that I was heavy-footed and it disturbed his sleep. I'm now 18 years old, and 2 years ago my parents decided I was old enough to stay home alone for a good 4 weeks. The nearest garage is 4 miles away. I had no means of transport, so I'd have to walk there and back about an hour and a half to get supplies, and when I ran out, most of the time it was dark, and there are woods surrounding our village, so I noped the heck out of there, going until the weekend. I did have Hannah as my girlfriend at the time's company on the weekends, great for walking to the garage with, and a couple of the weeks my parents were away, so it wasn't so bad. She left, and that's when it started to get really weird. Not so much creepy, just the gut feeling that I can never put my finger on. Back then I had one dog, but she's the best guard dog you can imagine. One night I settled down enjoying some TV after cooking dinner and mucking out the horses, so it would have been about 8 at night in the middle of winter, pitch black outside, when suddenly my dog starts whining and barking, running up the stairs to a window we have looking onto the street. Then after a while, when she came to the French windows in my living room and just stared into the darkness, growling. I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck starting to prick up, and there's a knot in my stomach. I can feel someone watching me. So I go to the curtains and I close them. I put it down to my imagination and that my dog, Panda, was just barking at an animal, right? No! The next few nights, the same thing happened. I walk through my hallways to the kitchen and feel someone watching through the curtainless window. Panda was on edge every single night at the same time, and she'd do the exact same things each night. So I lock and bolt up my doors, drag an armchair in front of the French windows, and take a poker upstairs with me. I call Hannah up and explain the situation. Every night she'd settle my nerves, and I just carry on as normal, but still had this gut feeling that would not leave. So eventually I got Hannah to come over. Things were fine in the daytime, then darkness set in, and immediately Panda started flipping out. And both Hannah and I got the sensation of being watched again. Hannah's a complete badass, always has been, so she grabbed the poker I'd been taking to bed and stepped outside, calling out aggressively into the darkness and hitting the poker against her hand like she meant business. My garden is large and surrounded by trees. There's a low path that leads to 4 stables and paddock, and there's 2 low fences, one being my chicken run fence, and the second being the fence into my neighbor's field. I stepped outside too, Panda came out too, and dashed towards the stables. We heard frantic rustling then, soft but clear thuds. My dog would not stop barking. Unsettled, we came back inside after Hannah and I had braved it and dragged Panda back from the bottom and the darkest part of the garden. But then we live in a village. We never once had a problem. It could have been a cat, right? No. A few more circumstances like this happened, such as the feeling of being watched when getting out of the shower. One time I caught someone standing on my neighbor's bank staring into our house. It was weird, but my dog wasn't barking, so I locked the doors and shrugged it off. When I next looked, he wasn't there anymore. Nothing really happened after that, but from time to time that gut feeling would just come back. I just knew something was off. I endeavored to make sure nothing was even the tiniest bit open whenever I got ready, or whenever I stayed alone or showered, and the feeling intensified whenever I was alone, though. In the end, I put it down to watching too many horror films and letting them play in my mind. That was until my mom came home with some shocking information. She comes home and sits down, looks at me for a moment before explaining she'd had an encounter with the new neighbors, now living in my ex's old house. They'd go on chatting, and he said he found Ken looking into their windows at night on more than one occasion with absolutely no reason for it. My blood ran cold, but I kept listening. My mom went on to say that John, the aforementioned neighbor, had found him staring into our house when my parents were away. When asked about his reasoning for being there, he responded with a weird vacant grin. "I'm just walking my dog." He doesn't have, I never did have a dog. Though I can't say for sure it was him in my garden. I have a gut feeling that it was. Safe to say I've always made sure my doors are locked and curtains closed.